Cynthia Shaw, and I'm going to play the Bach Italian Concerto. We haven't heard it yet, just wait. So even before I was in kindergarten, I was plunking away at the keys. So my folks sent me for piano lessons in my hometown of Pueblo, Colorado. My first teacher had bright orange hair and she smoked cigarettes during my lessons. But she taught me pieces with descriptive names like Country Gardens. Oh, it's very English, you know. I can smell the hollyhocks and the delphinium and the primrose. And then there was a skater's waltz. There on the ice are the red velvet, the Victorian skaters in their red velvet coats and white fur muffs. And then my favorite, the Cossack dance. Playing the piano was just so much fun. When I was 7 years old, my mom and I were in the waiting room of my Grandpa Shaw's office. Grandpa was a doctor, but don't worry, I wasn't there because I was sick or anything. We just used to go to Grandpa Shaw's office all the time. And what do I see on the waiting room table but a copy of The New Yorker? There was a cartoon on the cover. A tall, elegant-looking man in a black top hat, smoking a cigarette with a cigarette holder and a monocle on his eye, and a little butterfly fluttering over his head. I was intrigued. I opened it up and I read, "Goings on about town." And there were pages and pages of listings of opera, music, theater. The Beatles were playing at Carnegie Hall, and I wanted to see the Beatles. But all of these things were happening in New York City. Well, what kind of magical place was this New York City? Because I wanted to see all of these things. And there was nothing like this. In my hometown of Pueblo, Colorado. Pueblo, Colorado, a small town on the prairie, surrounded by cactus and cowboys, right smack dab in the middle of nowhere. Pueblo was called the Pittsburgh of the West because the main industry was the steel mill. But Colorado people called it the armpit of the West because the mill reeked of this metallic, rotten egg smell. This is where I grew up, and this is what I played. Our poor old piano was beyond repair and just worthless, so my folks splurged and ordered a new piano from back east. Well, we called any place east of the Mississippi River back east. So when the new piano arrived, I played my Bach. Ah, so much better. Now, my cigarette-smoking piano teacher taught me how to count while I played. 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 she taught me my finger numbers. 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 1. And she taught me how to use the pedal. Down, up, down, up. You know, playing the piano and trying to use the pedal is like patting your head and rubbing your stomach at the same time. Well, in fact, I want you all to try that with me. You people at home, you try that too, all right? This is what we're gonna do. Pat your head, very good. And now rub your tummy. Very, very nice. Now change hands. It gets very confusing, right? Well, that's what it's like. Thank you for indulging me. Thank you. That's what it's like to play the keys with your fingers and to push down the pedals with your hands. Anyway, my piano music, the John Thompson Modern Course for Piano, published in 1937, promised something new with every lesson. But it was really just a series of cute little classical music tunes that didn't follow any pedagogical order. You'd learn one tune and then you just learn another. But the thing is that all of these tune books, these John Thompson books, had pictures and descriptions with all of the tunes. So while I played my pieces, I would make up stories. Hello, I'm the famous composer J.S. Bach, and I'm playing my really famous Minuet in G, surrounded by my 21 children. That was a lot better than 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and oi. But what I never learned was technique. And by technique, I mean scales and arpeggios and the dreaded Hanon exercises. These were designed to teach our fingers patterns and to make them stronger. But because I never had any technique, I just struggled with my little tiny fingers trying to push down the heavy, gigantic piano keys. I never had to play any recitals, and I never had to memorize my music. So my music always had to be up here. But the good thing was, no matter what you put in front of me, I could play it. And if it was too hard for me, I just made stuff up. And I loved musical theater, like Oklahoma or The Sound of Music. And then Jesus Christ Superstar came out. And I've had so many men before in very many ways. He's just one more. It was the perfect song for a 12-year-old. I'd hate it when we'd go visit my parents' friends and my mom would turn to me and say, Cynthia, why don't you play something for us? And I'd be like, no, I don't have my music with me and I don't have anything memorized because my brain isn't big enough to hold all of the notes. I actually believed that. But music was my shining star. I was special because I was a musician. I played the piano. Not everyone played the piano, but I did. And yet I always thought I wasn't good enough and no one wanted to listen to me. You see, my family was divided into two groups. My mom, my sister Jessie, who played the flute, and me in one group, and my dad in another, by himself. Daddy was this distant god. He was quiet, smart, creative. He was always building and designing things. He was calm and logical, and he wasn't emotional like my mom. I wanted to be exactly like him. Now, Daddy played the trombone, and and he loved jazz and big band music. So even though he had a 9-to-5 job at a TV station, on evenings and weekends, he was off playing jazz in bars and restaurants, clubs, strip joints, places we couldn't go, and leaving my mom home by herself, which she didn't like very much. So while Jessie and I practiced our classical music and played our flute and piano duets together, my dad was off doing his own thing. It was only when I became an adult that I realized that musical families play together all the time. I mean, the whole family, the Patrych family, the Von Trapp family, but not us. My dad only played with this blind jazz pianist, Leon Dudley. And as a kid, I thought, well, Daddy doesn't play with me because I'm not blind. You know, kid thinking. Even when I was in high school, Daddy would play gigs with guys from my class. I mean, I remember their names, George Roach and Bobby Montoya. It was George Roach this and Bobby Montoya that. And he'd play jobs with them and he'd come home and he'd wax poetic about how wonderful it was. I was jealous. I wanted him to play with me. But Daddy was a cool jazz musician. He belonged to like this secret club that I wasn't allowed to join. He was cool. He called classical musicians squares. So I guess that made me a square classical musician. But my mom adored classical music, and she'd go to the Pueblo Symphony with Grandpa Shaw, and she had always wanted to take piano lessons when she was a little girl. But her immigrant parents said it was just a waste of money. So she made sure we had our lessons, and Jesse and I practiced a half an hour every day. But my mom was a music lover and not a music maker like my mysterious dad. So her support didn't mean as much to me. Plus, she resented my father's music making and his lack of involvement in our family life. She so desperately wanted him to be in our world, and he was not. And it was all music's fault. And even when we were together, we weren't. This one time, my mom convinced my dad to take us to the Great Sand Dunes National Park in Colorado. So while Mommy and Jesse and I climbed the dunes, laughing and joking, and our feet sinking into the sand, my dad was in the parking lot, standing outside the car in his good shoes, smoking a cigarette, tapping his foot, and waiting for us to finish. I mean, I do have sweet daddy memories, like the time Daddy taught me how to clap a 2-against-3 rhythm at the dinner table. So now I want you all to try this with me, all right? So first, we're going to clap a 2 rhythm with one hand. You ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 1, 2. That's excellent, excellent. All right, now we're going to clap a 3 rhythm with the other hand. All right, you ready? Here we go. Well, that's pretty good, pretty good. You can all applaud yourselves for that valiant effort. But tonight when you go home after the show, you too will be able to play the Debussy Arabesque because it has a 2-against-3 rhythm. Daddy could also be very playful. He loved Monty Python, and he could play a mean game of Monopoly. We'd play until all hours. He was ruthless, and he always won. On Sunday nights, he made us popcorn, which we ate for dinner as we watched TV. But here's how separate Daddy was. He'd make one big bowl of popcorn for himself and drink Dr. Pepper. And then he'd make another big bowl of popcorn for my mom, Jessie, and me, and we'd drink Pepsi, totally separate. He also made artichokes. So popcorn and artichokes were his specialty. But when it came to connecting through music, it just didn't happen. I mean, would we have if I played jazz? I don't know, because he never taught me. And I was so in awe of him, I was afraid to ask. Jazz was Daddy's world. But it was sort of okay. I mean, I was young and I was busy with my friends and school, and I just made music any way I could. So when I was at Centennial High School, I auditioned for the role of Golda in our all-Gentile version of Fiddler on the Roof. Hi, I'm Cynthia Shaw, and I want to sing Golda. Do you love me? Well, they couldn't hear me. But I was determined. So after everybody else auditioned, I went up on stage and I said, "Hello, I'm Cynthia Shaw and I want to audition again." Whoops. Do you love me? And they did. And I got the part. I also sang in choir, and sometimes before concerts, a couple of us altos would go back behind the auditorium and smoke a joint. And then we'd go on stage and we'd look at each other in that knowing marijuana way. I mean, our director, Mr. Butcher, told us to get high on life. I was just getting high on life and music. At nighttime, I would hear my parents arguing. My mom shouts, my dad silence. It got so bad that my mom ran off to the mountains, her purse full of sleeping pills. My dad was frantic. He drove to the mountains to try to find my mom. Jessie and I were terrified. How was Daddy going to find Mommy in the gigantic Rocky Mountains? He didn't find her, but she did come back. This is Whispering Hope. It's an old Victorian song that my grandmother Mimi, my dad's mom, taught Jessie and me when we were kids. Now, Mimi had been a silent movie pianist in Oklahoma. She was a pianist just like me, but she had made a bad marriage to my Grandpa Shaw. Now, you would think that Grandpa would have bought her a beautiful piano to play, but he bought her a player piano. It sat in the living room for years. We grandkids, we used to love to fool around on it. We'd pump the pedals with our feet and we'd watch the rolls go round and round. And the keys magically go up and down by themselves. But it was a gimmick and not really a good piano to actually practice. Grandpa ultimately bought Mimi an electronic organ when she was old and her fingers were riddled with arthritis. They had a sad marriage. Mimi would oftentimes disappear into her separate bedroom for days on end with headaches. She ultimately checked out with nervous breakdowns and pills that Grandpa prescribed to her to help her overcome her depression. Running away, everyone was always running away, wishing they were someplace else. I guess that was easier than saying what it was that you wanted or trying to express yourself. We didn't do that. So I closed up. I felt like a beautiful box on the outside, but empty and ugly on the inside. I mean, not that I thought I was physically beautiful, because I did not. I just felt not good enough. I was determined to leave Pueblo, and I got into college as a piano major at the University of Denver in Denver, Colorado, which wasn't that far from Pueblo, Colorado. My first teacher was my new teacher was Francisco Ibar, and I adored him. He was from New York City, but every lesson with him was a musical inspiration. I felt alive in his presence because with him, everything was about music and New York City. He said, "Oh, Cynthia, last week I was in Pedelson's and I was talking to the very famous pianist Rudolf Serkin, and he and I were discussing your Chopin Ballade." Wait, you were talking about my ballade with Rudolf Serkin? At Pedelson's? What's Pedelson's? Oh, Cynthia, Pedelson's is just the most important music store in New York. It's right behind Carnegie Hall. Don't worry, you'll go there someday. Oh, by the way, here is a book listing all of the major and minor scales and arpeggios you'll need to know in order to graduate. I had never seen that before, and I didn't know my scales and arpeggios, but I could play Brahms. with that, I won the annual concerto competition. It was in college that I started having major negative thoughts about myself. My world was getting bigger, but so were my insecurities. I loved playing the piano, but I doubted anyone really wanted to listen to me. And when I played, I had these demons yapping away in my head. You're not good enough. No one wants to listen to you. You don't know your scales and arpeggios. You can't memorize your music. You're not a good pianist. And when I would play on stage in front of people, I would have major anxiety attacks. This one time, I was on stage in front of the entire music school. I was playing the fugue from the Ravel Tombeau de Couperin from memory. Now, it starts out simple enough. And then it wraps around itself. And then I got lost. And I started to panic. And I looked up and everything in front of me had just turned white. So I did what I always did. I just made stuff up. I was mortified and humiliated in front of the entire music school. I hated being on stage by myself, and I hated that everyone was staring at me. And I sabotaged myself all the time. But for some reason, Mr. Ibar kept encouraging me. So I practiced 24 hours a day. I knew I could play beautifully, and I knew I could play wonderfully, but just not all the time. I was a musician, just like my grandmother Mimi, and just like my dad. Mr. Ibar suggested that I should audition for graduate school at his alma mater, the Manhattan School of Music in New York City, and that I should study with his teacher, Doris Zaslavsky. I was honored. He had not mentioned this to any of his other students. I'd never been to New York, but for some reason, I knew that's where I belonged. I belonged where the home of the New Yorker magazine. Once a month, my college roommate, Sally, and I would lie on her bed on our stomachs, and we watch live at the Met, the Metropolitan live television broadcast. Picture it. It's opening night at the Met. The men are in tuxedos. The women in fancy ball gowns. And they swoosh to their orchestra seats, their diamond-studded tiaras gleaming in the light. The overture begins, and the crystal chandeliers magically recede into the ceiling. The red velvet curtains begin to open, and the orchestra swells to a climax. I could hardly wait for my audition. Now, going to New York was huge. In fact, it was so huge, I skipped my college graduation to go. My sister Jessie came with me, and when she and I got here, we quickly realized that New York was very different than Pueblo. For one thing, everybody in New York walks. In Pueblo, if people see you walking down the street, they figure your car is broken and they offer to pick you up. People in Pueblo pop in on each other. People in New York don't even know their neighbors' names. Everybody in Pueblo wore bright colored clothing, but everyone in New York was dressed in black, like there was a citywide funeral going on. Men in business suits walked down the street licking ice cream cones. This was a whole different world, and I liked it. Now, the first night there, Jessie and I decided to go to a Broadway show. You know what it was? Annie, yes. So even though our hotel was just a few blocks away from the theater, we were scared to walk down the street alone at nighttime. So we took the bus, and we sat in the seats next to the driver. Felt safer there. But those seats are reserved for the elderly and handicapped. We didn't know. As the bus continued up Broadway, two old ladies, as we called them, got on, and they saw the elderly seats were taken. They sat nearby and they glared at us. And then one of them said, "You girls should be walking." I had never met old people like that before in my life. In Colorado, old people are kindly, warm, sweet grandparent types. They bake you cookies and they tell you ancient stories. Guess not in New York. I mean, those two old ladies, they scared me half to death. But at the same time, I thought they were really awesome. Now, the next day was my audition for Manhattan School of Music. Mr. Ibar had arranged for me to practice the piano that morning in his mother-in-law's penthouse apartment. A penthouse apartment. The maid let us in. There was a maid. I mean, nobody in Pueblo has a maid. And what do I see on the coffee table but the New Yorker? Well, of course she has the New Yorker. She lives in New York. I hadn't touched the piano for a couple of days, which suddenly felt like a lifetime ago, and I started getting really nervous. I mean, today was my audition for the Manhattan School of Music, the most important music school in the world and where I wanted to be. What if I messed up? What if they didn't like me? No, I wasn't gonna mess up and they were gonna like me because I had practiced like crazy and I was playing Beethoven. Jesse and I walked to the audition. I had never walked that far in my life. It took us over an hour and I almost missed my audition. When I walked into the audition room, I was frazzled and exhausted, and what do I see but this long table of all these sourpuss-looking, wrinkly-skinned piano teachers eating donuts. Kind of looked like that famous painting of the Last Supper. "Hi, I'm Cynthia Shaw. I'm from Pueblo, Colorado, and I'm going to play Beethoven." Oops. Oh no. How does it go? How does it go? Calm down, calm down. Okay. All right. Here we go. Very nice. That was good. This is going well. Wait, don't speed up. Don't do that. No. Well, you skipped a section. Oh my God, it's a mess. Oh my God, they're staring at me. They want me to stop. They think I'm awful. I wasn't good enough. What was I going to do? Stay in Pueblo and die in obscurity? I mean, I didn't want to be like my dad and waste my entire life there. I had to go to New York, and I had to study with Dora Zaslavsky. Now, the year is 1977. New York is bankrupt. I mean, New York has no money. Every night on the news, my family and I would watch TV and we'd hear about all the horrible things going on in New York City. Sex shops overran Times Square Theater District. The subways were covered in graffiti. And they said when you walked down the street, it smelled like urine. The serial killer, the son of Sam, he targeted young women with long black wavy hair. I had long black wavy hair. And then on July 13th, the entire city went into total blackout. Thousands of New Yorkers took to the streets, rioting and looting. I mean, Pueblo was in the west, but New York City was turning into the wild, wild west. As we sat watching the news every night in Pueblo, I knew my parents would never let me go. But amazingly, they did. And I went. Now, the first thing I had to do was to find a place to live. The Manhattan School of Music had recommended the Parkside Evangeline Salvation Army Home for Women in Gramercy Park. They had pianos. I moved in. But the first time I went to practice, the pianos were in the boiling hot basement. I mean, I almost passed out from heat exhaustion practicing in there. Thank goodness I found a beautiful piano on the second floor lounge. I could practice there. I played really loudly. Unfortunately, the second floor lounge piano was right over the major's office. The major was the Salvation Army officer who ran Parkside Evangeline. He ruled with an iron fist inside of a white glove. He told me my piano playing was driving him crazy, and I had two options. One was to practice in the boiling, hot as hell basement, or move out. I moved out. I continued looking. A billboard ad in Greenwich Village advertised a room for rent in a swinger's apartment. Well, I didn't know how to play swing piano, so I didn't want to live with a swinger. So I moved to the Upper West Side, where all of the classical musicians lived. I rented a small studio apartment that was within walking distance of Carnegie Hall. It had beautiful inlaid wood floors and a gigantic bathroom. The advantage to the gigantic bathroom was that I could wash my dishes in the gigantic bathtub because there was no sink in the kitchen. The apartment had two windows. One faced a brick wall, like that. The other one was on a fire escape and had a security gate that came down that was locked. There was no key. I mean, heaven forbid there be a fire. I would be burned to a crisp. In Pueblo, we always had fire drills. The Irish landlady stopped by to welcome me to the building, and she asked me when my furniture was arriving. I told her I had no furniture, so she took me down to the basement that looked like a huge used furniture store with all of this furniture left over by former tenants. She said I could borrow whatever I wanted just as long as I returned everything when I moved out. Now I had to get a piano. Now back in Pueblo, Grandpa Shaw had always promised he would buy me a piano. He wouldn't buy his wife Mimi a piano, but he would buy me a piano. But there was a caveat. I had to get married and settle down first. But I wasn't getting married, and I wasn't settling down, and I would never get married, and I would never settle down. I just needed a piano. Thank goodness my mom convinced him, and he bought me a beat-up, old, upright grand piano. As soon as the piano arrived, I realized I'd made a huge mistake. It was tall and bulky, and it weighed a ton, and it took over half the apartment just there against the wall. But there it was, and I had to practice. Now, I don't know how many of you have actually lived next door to a classical piano player, but this is what practicing is like. It's designed to torture your family, your friends, and your neighbors, anyone within earshot. All right, so first you play your right hand. The same thing over and over again until you get it right. Then you practice your left hand. Again, over and over again. Then you put it together. This could go on for hours and hours. Are you tortured yet? Are you? My neighbors were. I had this neighbor, Jim, who lived next door. He was a writer, and he wrote sappy romance novels. Now, the walls between our apartments were paper thin, and he could hear everything. He wanted me to stop playing the piano, but he didn't want to have to tell me in person. So he would write notes and put them under my door. One of them said, "I'm writing a love scene, and I can't get in the mood with all of this loud piano playing going on." Every other pianist I knew lived in an apartment that had thick walls, and they could practice whenever they wanted. And Jim's little note just reminded me of all the people who didn't want to hear me play the piano. My mom, who would vacuum while I practiced, our cat Ginger, who would bite me, and my dad. So I moved the piano across the beautiful inlaid wood floors to the other wall, and I stuffed a blanket in the back. Now, you know, in popular culture, pianos are moving all the time. In the cartoons, the coyote is pushing the piano off the edge of the cliff to try to hit the little roadrunner below. Or in the old black and white movies, they were always like taking a grand piano up the outside of a building until it would get to the very top, and then for some inexplicable reason, the piano would break free and it would crash to the ground in a million pieces. Or in that famous Laurel and Hardy movie, they pushed a piano up the long flight of stairs only to have it fall back down over and over and over again. And little known fact, during the Second World War, Steinway pianos were actually airlifted into battlefields so that the servicemen could practice and entertain themselves when they weren't fighting. They even put pianos in submarines. So pianos are just moving all the time. Another note. It says carpet. So I bought a carpet and I laid it over the beautiful inlaid wood floors. So now I have to move the piano onto the carpet. So I try pulling the piano, but it's too heavy and it won't budge. So then I try pushing the piano, like that. But again, the carpet's too thick and the piano is too heavy. So I get this really bright idea to lift the piano. I lift the piano and whap! It tips over. And there it lay on the floor like a beached whale on top of the carpeting in the middle of my small studio apartment. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. It was Jim. Cynthia? I came up with this really great idea. I've designed a red light, green light system that I'll put a green sticker on my door if it's okay for you to practice, but I'll put a red sticker on my door if it's not okay for you to practice. And what is the piano doing on your floor? It fell. Jim took pity on me, and together he and I lifted the piano and pushed it into place on top of the carpeting. Jim was suddenly my new best friend. And it was just in time, because I had a lesson with my new piano teacher, Dora Zaslavsky, Mr. Ibar's former New York City piano teacher. Now, Dora had been teaching at the Manhattan School of Music since the 1920s. She was old and short and plump, and she had this white streak in her otherwise badly dyed black hair. She kind of looked like a skunk. She wore these long, flowing, loose-fitting dresses that covered up her ample bosom. She was cultured and sophisticated, but also arrogant and condescending. I played my Bach partita for her. No, Cynthia, you have to play with more passion, more drama. Scoot over and let me show you how an artist plays. Cynthia, you have to make love to the piano. Cynthia, you are not practicing enough. I practiced all the time. Well, as long as there was a green sticker on Jim's door. But I never seemed to be home when Dora would call to check up on me, to make sure I was practicing. She did that to all of her students. She also had these Wednesday night piano soirees in her huge Central Park West apartment. It was weird. First we'd have dinner, and there would be Dora royally presiding at one end of the table. And at the other end of the table would be her husband, John. Now, John had been a famous painter. He actually had a painting hanging in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. But he had suffered a series of strokes, so he drooled while he was being fed by a nurse. After supper, we all played for each other. Now, all of the other pianists were amazing, and they played like this. But because I got so nervous, I played like this. was just awful. But I did meet a fellow pianist there, Joyce. Joyce was from Texas, and she had crazy red curly hair, and she spoke with a twang. She was already studying at Manhattan School of Music, and she knew all of the gossip. She said, "Oh, Cynthia, don't take Dora so seriously. She's just trying to impress everybody. At school, they call her the Queen." But the other great thing about meeting all of these other classical piano students is that we would all go to Carnegie Hall together to hear famous pianists. We'd sit in the top of the balcony, the cheap seats, the nosebleed section. And after a while, I began to realize that all of the people sitting up there were classical piano students. Some even brought their musical scores to follow along. It was so exciting. We'd be on the edge of our seats. There'd be burly Russian pianist Lazar Berman playing Liszt. Or petite Spanish pianist Alicia de la Rocha playing Mozart. It was rumored her hands were so small she could barely reach an octave. Or dreamy Italian pianist Maurizio Pollini playing Schubert. But the highlight of it all was hearing Vladimir Horowitz play his rousing transcription of John Philip Sousa's Stars and Stripes Forever. I loved going to Carnegie Hall, and then sometimes I'd go across the street where there was jazz. The jazz pianist Dick Hyman was playing the new hit made popular by Dave Brubeck, Take 5. Now, back in Pueblo, Leon Dudley was playing jazz with Daddy, but it was nothing like this. Now, towards the end of the piece, Dick got so excited in the music, he started heaving and hoeing and grunting and groving like this, like he was having an orgasm right there on stage in front of everybody. I mean, I'd never had an orgasm, but I think that's what it was. Needless to say, I was loving my new life in New York City. But I began asking myself, why do I need to go to graduate school? Was I trying to prove something to my dad who had never graduated from college? Was I going to graduate school so that I could meet people who would help further my career? I was so innocent that had never even occurred to me. But what I did know was I did not want to go back to Pueblo, and playing the piano was my ticket out. Finally, in early December, I had my second Manhattan School audition. I don't even know what I played. It's all just a big blur. A few days later, Dora called me. "Cynthia, you did not get into the Manhattan School of Music, and you have embarrassed me in front of all of the other piano teachers. I no longer want you as a student. You are not a good enough pianist to live in New York City." To get a little sympathy, I called home. But my mom wasn't there, so I spoke to my dad. And even before I could tell him about Dora and the audition, he started rattling on about all the music jobs he had. I mean, was he trying to impress me, or was he trying to connect with me? Finally, when I could get a word in edgewise, he just said, "Well, honey, I'm sure you'll figure it out." He didn't want to hear I was struggling, that I was having a hard time being a pianist in New York City, that I needed his help and his guidance. I needed him. So I called Joyce. She said, "Well, why don't you just call the president of Manhattan School of Music and ask him to recommend another teacher?" He recommended Solomon Makowski, but I decided to wait to call Dr. Makowski because I was going home to visit my family for Christmas. When I got back to Pueblo, my mom took me aside and she said, "Cynthia, you need to move back home. New York City is not the place for you." I didn't know what else to do. So I flew back to New York to sell the beat-up old upright grand piano, return the borrowed furniture to Mrs. O'Neill, and leave for good. I walked into my small studio apartment and I closed the door and I locked it. And I just stood there in the dark, looking around. And then it hit me. This is my apartment. This is where I live. No one can come in here unless I invite them. I'm not going home. I am home. I called my mom. "But Cynthia, we decided." "No, Mommy, you decided. I'm staying in New York." I immediately called Mr. Makowski to set up a lesson. He asked me if I knew my scales and arpeggios. Of course I didn't know my scales and arpeggios. I've been avoiding them my entire life. He said, "You need them." He wasn't flamboyant like Mr. Ibar or dramatic like Dora. He was all nuts and bolts, black and white, straightforward. I'd finally found the right piano teacher, and he knew what I needed to do to get into Manhattan School of Music. He was a musical father I never had. Finally, it was time for my third audition for Manhattan School of Music. This time, I was really prepared. "Hi, I'm Cynthia Shaw, and I'll be playing Brahms." I was staying in New York. As tough as school was, I was determined and had started believing in myself. And even though I thought that everyone else was much better than me, I did get my master's degree in piano performance from the Manhattan School of Music, the most important music school in the world. When I did my master's recital, my mom and my dad and my sister came. My mom and my sister loved it. My dad was quiet. So I don't know if he was proud of me or not. But what I do know is that even though he lived for another 35 years, that was the last time he ever heard me play. I don't think my dad was a terrible, awful, evil person. I just think that he was tortured about his own music making and he just didn't know how to connect with me musically. So here we are, many years later. I still live in New York, and I still have those demons yapping away in my head, telling me I'm not good enough and no one wants to listen to me. But at least now I know that they're there and I can deal with them. I mean, here I am standing in front of all of you playing the piano and talking for an hour, and I don't hate that you're looking at me. In fact, I kind of like it. I've performed at Carnegie Hall, though not as a pianist, but as a singer. I one time actually got to sing backup vocals for Sir Paul McCartney, which was pretty awesome. I keep thinking that I'm going to learn how to play jazz piano someday. And because of my love of storytelling, I've become an actress in film and theater. And I teach piano lessons, and I make sure all my students practice their scales and arpeggios. But sometimes when they're playing their pieces, we pretend like elephants are dancing or fairies are flying up in the sky, or the piano was like an orchestra. And it's like the cellos are like squirrels being chased up a tree by barking dogs. And with my adult students, sometimes we pretend like they're drinking a glass of wine while they're playing. Anything to get them out of their heads and to reduce those demons telling them that they're not good enough. Because you know what? They are. I'm Cynthia Shaw, and I'll be playing the Debussy L'Île Joyeuse, the Joyous Isle, just like New York City. Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you to Klavierhaus and Joseph for hosting me. And thank you all for being here. I'm so happy you all are here to hear my...
What a fantastic show.
Thank you.
And brought back so many memories for me. You're talking about those concerts in the 70s, Lazar Berman and young Paulini and Horowitz. Which I heard many times. I've heard him many times.
I only heard him once, but.
And I have to keep in mind, because every time I think of the word Velvet, I think of Velvet Underground, which was a rock group in the 70s. Yep. But now I get the determination part. Yeah.
People oftentimes ask me, how did you get this name? So for me, velvet is like, I think of a ribbon. I don't think of the fabric, but like on one side it's soft and smooshy, but if you pull, it's really strong. And that's kind of how I feel about myself and my journey. Like, even though I may seem like soft and smooshy, there's like this steely, determined thing underneath.
Does she seem soft and smooshy?
Do I seem soft and smooshy? I don't know. You know how you think about yourself.
You do feel and sound very determined, and it was great that determination got you through all the pitfalls that are common in New York City.
Yep.
And by the way, thank you for that image of Doris Zaslavsky as a skunk.
I know, I feel kind of bad about saying that, but...
That was my favorite line in the whole show.
Poor Dora. Yeah. No, she was a wonderful teacher, but I think I was not the right student for her.
She was a difficult lady.
She was. Yeah.
Then again, Manhattan School has been populated with that sort. So...
I don't know. I had a good time there, so... and I had a great teacher, so I was really happy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great school. A lot of great people came out of MSM, and including you.
Exactly. Well, thank you.
So you are, you're doing all sorts of things now. You should probably be doing this show all over the place.
Well, I've done this show.
Extremely entertaining.
Oh, good. I've done this show actually since 2018. The first place I did it was at the United Solo Festival at Theatre Row. And then I've done it at 59 East 59th Street. Last year I took it to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, and I did 21 performances there. I took it to Reykjavik Fringe Festival and Rochester. So I performed it a fair number of places, yeah.
That's great.
A couple of weeks ago I performed on City Island, so that was fun. Yeah.
What about playing a full-length real classical recital? When's the last time you did that?
Oh, no. Well, actually, that's not true. During the pandemic, I did that. Because, what else do you have to do during the pandemic, right? But practice. So, in fact, I did recitals of the Debussy, the L'Île Joyeuse, the whole piece. and the whole Schubert B-flat major sonata, the one, so.
The Pollini sonata.
The Pollini sonata, yeah. So I did do that, but otherwise, no. It's too much, it's too hard. It's way too hard.
They tell me it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of work, so no.
Well, thank you so much. This was delightful and different from what we usually do, and come up with another show and come back.
Okay. So just so
or
everyone,
you can repeat this one if you can get
yeah.
the people to show up.
Yeah. So just so you all know, the Klavierhaus has piano recitals every Sunday night at 7:30. I've been to a couple of them. They're totally amazing, really great pianists, just really wonderful music, and they're also live streamed if you just want to sit on your couch and watch. But I think it's fun to come because, like, look at this piano. It's like awesome. So yeah,
quite a few of those here, by the way.
Yeah. So definitely, this is a definite place to come for great new piano recitals.
Well, thanks for the ad.
Well, you're welcome. I'm happy to share the love.
So
yes, we have a question.
Questions. Talk.
Are you taking questions?
Sure, why not? But talk into the mic for our poor people at home.
This is just a fun little question. I'm just curious, what kind of piano do you have at home?
Actually, I have a Steinway, a 1910 Steinway. And believe it or not, I just bought it during the pandemic. Like, who buys a piano? I had a Kawai Grand at home. And during the pandemic, I thought, I need to get another piano. So I bought this 1910 Steinway, which actually I discovered there's another one exactly like my piano back in the corner there. So, yeah, so I have a Steinway.
What size is it?
5'10".
And so it's an L. L/O.
Yeah, so it's exactly like that black one back there with the little curly things on it. Yeah, it's really pretty.
Who restored it?
A Brian Witten at Big Wrench Piano in Brooklyn. He's a Steinway guy.
Oh.
He has
Actually from 1910?
The piano, yeah. Yeah, and it actually, I know this is like evil to say, but it actually has ivory keys. I'm sorry. It has ivory keys that have not chipped, have not anything. So they say, he told me it was owned by an old lady who never played it. So there you go. It's like the car with no mileage. Yeah, so that's what I have at home.
So that brings up a question. So you have a piano with ivory keys.
Yeah.
Which, I always say that banning the ivory keys, I understand, of course, you don't want anybody to produce ivory keys, but banning the ivories on an existing piano, unfortunately, will not bring that elephant back. So, it kind of doesn't make sense to strip a good set of ivory keys off of a piano.
Yeah.
But what I'm curious about, because these days, of course, every piano has plastic keys.
Right.
For you, is there a big difference when you switch?
No,
Not at all.
No. I even have a Yamaha electric piano, and I practice on that sometimes, and yeah.
But it has a weighted action.
It has weighted
course.
action, yeah. I even have a folding piano, which when I went to Edinburgh and to Reykjavik, I bought this folding piano, and it folds in half. And so I can carry it on the plane. It's awesome, and it has weighted keys, or full size. Yeah. And I can plug in my pedal, and I can plug in a speaker, because the speaker is like, but yeah, it's really great, and I can practice on that. So if you're ever looking for a piano,
if it had a headphone jack, you could practice on the plane.
Well, I could, yeah, I could.
You'd be one of those weirdos who practice on a plane.
No, I don't want to practice on a plane. It's enough. Yeah. No.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's really no. In fact, I said to myself, wouldn't it be cool if there was something like a folding piano? And I was like, well, why don't you look that up? And folding, sure enough. And then I watched this YouTube video of this professor, I think he was, and he compared 3 folding pianos, and he had all this music, so he was sort of legit. And he chose one, that was the best one, and I agreed, and I bought that one, and the rest is history.
Who's the manufacturer?
It's called Semitone, or I don't know. I have to find out. It's white. That's the only thing I don't like. It's white, but there you go. Yeah, but it's great.
It doesn't come in color. It's pity.
No. So, yeah.
One more question.
Yes.
If there were one piece of concert music you would like to learn and play but haven't done so, what would that be? I know it's a hard question, especially off the top of the spur of the moment, but give it a shot.
Oh my gosh, what would I play?
We all have one piece of music we really want to play and have never played.
Well, it used to be L'Île Joyeuse, but now I play that. And I don't know, I think I'd like to get back to playing some Liszt. I don't know what Liszt, but every time I look at Liszt, I'm just like, wow, this is really hard.
There's a lot of Liszt.
It's a lot of Liszt, yeah, so I don't know. I have a hard time being motivated to practice if I don't have like a project.
God, it sounds so much like me.
Yeah, so.
Well, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you all so
Great job.
much. Thank you.